Hello, Urbit fanatics. It's poldec-tonteg back with another episode of 0K, the podcast where we talk about the future of Urbit, the decentralized operating system for the next 500 years. Today, I have a discussion that I had with locruc-fonmec, which is a man otherwise known as Owen Barnes or Temporal Wave on Twitter. We talked about artificial intelligence and what that means for the future of the application model, both on Urbit and just in general. What kind of application models are now possible when you have a personal AI that can operate and train on all of your private data. So this is a discussion we had when he came down to El Salvador to give a talk, which he blew out of the water. And he really introduced me to a lot of new concepts. And I think it's going to be really important for the future of applications on Urbit. So join me and Temporal Wave as we discuss the future of the application model on Urbit.
So I think what I'd like to do first is just talk to you about how you kind of like first heard the words Urbit and what really kind of drew you in and how did what did that spark within you that made you come all the way out to El Salvador?
Sure. For me, I think I've always been really interested in how we can do computing better, and being a sort of web developer, full stack developer for a long time, I've spent so many hours just wishing that this very boring, repetitive task was either faster or just designed out entirely.
Yeah.
And so many of those tasks come down to taking a piece of JSON and serializing it and pushing it in a database and sending it down a message queue, and all of these sort of bizarre ways of working that everybody just accepts as the way it is.
Yeah.
And whole jobs and industries spin up around it. And you really think about, well, who's benefiting from this system at the moment? Like the apps we have are swallowing our data in them, and we don't own and control it. We can't even get it out if we try, because most don't even have APIs. So some years ago, I started hearing about Urbit, and it was on the sort of periphery of all the other things I was looking at, mostly crypto. But I was interested enough to read a little bit and buy a star when they came out. And it really wasn't until I went to Bogota last year, and Urbit had a meetup there, and I got to talk to Ted, and it really was him alone who convinced me.
Urbit pilled you, huh?
Totally, Urbit pilled me, and it was the intersection of many thoughts I'd had for many years coming together, and also just seeing a very credible team and a very, feeling exactly the same as I did in the early days of Ethereum, thinking, okay, there's no money in this project yet, there's no attention on it, nobody knows what it is, but I can feel the magic of something amazing being built here.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm here.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think it's, you hear that a lot where it's sort of, it ends up being kind of a one-to-one, people talk about the sort of missionary quality of Urbit, but I think it is,
Yeah.
It takes that personal connection sometimes.
It does, and people always say, you never leave a job, you leave a boss. And I think it's also the same way around. When you're hired, I always join companies because I really like the person interviewing me. I want to work for them, and I respect them as well. And I think being in that sort of community where you really do respect the people is key. In the same way that people respect Vitalik, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that we had a talk earlier by Lane Reddig about the early days of Ethereum, from someone who was there, and it is that those things do matter, and we talk about the technicals a lot, right? Yes. But at the end of the day, it's the community of people, and that makes it happen.
Yeah, very specifically the vision and the values.
Yeah,
that's what's key. And Lane correctly said that was never formally articulated in the early days of Ethereum. And some people thought, well, we're too big now. We can't get round to like putting them on our website or anything like that. But speaking about what binds us together and what we value, what we'll never compromise on. And in the case of Urbit, it's like you want to own your data, own data. Period. Like no one's going to argue with that. So having that sort of set of vision and values is so fundamental.
So you mentioned that you had worked, I'm assuming, in sort of like traditional stack web development, and I was thinking about this, like how, I mean, it's an interesting general point, how many things we see is just like born out of frustration with how one works, and it's sort of like there's like either people just deal with it or they or they become
it's worse
frustrated
than
with
that. It's actually much worse than that. So I would say it comes into three sections. The first of them do deal with it, and I would say that's the majority of the pie chart if you draw it. The other small minority like me are like, what the hell are we doing? Like, why are we rewriting this React app or something in some like other bullshit framework or something? And then the sort of the most worrying part is the part that knows that it's terrible, but they just want this paycheck. So they keep quiet about it. In fact, they would be very anti against anything that comes and disrupts their paycheck.
Absolutely. You said that, I was like, oh, that's a good point.
So that's the worst kind. And unfortunately, they permeate through all parts of technology. As I'm talking more about AI replacing coding, I'm getting resistance all around me. But it's going to happen. Of course it's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really good point. It's almost like accountants who oppose simplifying the tax rules.
Yeah, Intuit and the famous legal cases there, absolutely.
And I mean, it's interesting because when you have these discussions, especially around Urbit, it's like, simplifying things on the technical level has all of these potential personal aesthetic repercussions that go beyond simply like, oh, it's an easier way to move, strings around.
Yes,
right? That's really interesting. So you said that you also have a background in crypto, long time interest in crypto. Do you feel like, I know, I hear it said a lot, this sort of idea that the Ethereum energy and the Urbit energy, early Ethereum energy, are kind of like have this resonance. So do you feel that way as well? Is Ethereum kind of like the touchstone for you for crypto, or do you have other things?
Yes. So my Ethereum sort of experience started before the ICO and before DEFCON 1, when Vitalik would come to London and give demos, and the people showing up there based on just a crazy idea, absolutely no money promised or any sort of guarantee of success whatsoever. But a desire to build something new and some great ideas, and the people who came in the room sort of back then and the people who come to this event now are very similar in terms of, they're sort of misfits in the technology world because they can see what very few can see, which is just how badly broken things are.
Yeah.
In the case of Ethereum, it was how badly broken the world of finance and, DeFi, which never existed back then, but does now, and so on is. And in the case of Urbit, it's how badly broken the whole full stack computing experience is.
That's really interesting. I feel like there's a seductive quality to people who are like, willing to kind of take the leap and say maybe it's something, and it draws in all kinds of people.
It does.
So that's really cool. So we kind of glanced on it a little bit, but I kind of wanted to talk to you about your subject of your talk, future vision of like developing personal applications and really the different role that a computer can play in the life of the user. But right now, of course, the ChatGPT, that I'm doing air quotes, AI phenomenon.
Sure.
That's of course the topic of the hour among a lot of people. So I'm interested if you could kind of like walk me through, how when someone says, just use ChatGPT, what is that? And what does that mean to you?
Okay.
And what are the issues that arise from how it's done now?
Yes. Okay, so this is an area that I'm learning rapidly, and certainly not, we can talk about web development and crypto all day long. But from my understanding so far, and I'm sort of intrigued to know more about this, is the large language model is simply a very expensive training process over a lot of public data. In this case, a lot of open GitHub repositories, same as used in Codex, which is OpenAI's, the autocomplete engine used in Copilot. And what we end up with is a probabilistically massive graph of like what comes next. So when you open something that says public class and open a brace, well, what comes next after that? And the ability to not just look at this, but to go back several words down the line is what gives us these variations and these suggestions, which a computer can then play with to give you something that it thinks that you're going to want. I think there's huge amounts more than that going on, and this is what I'm really trying to get to the bottom of myself. And this is why I think open sourcing the models from Stability AI is so important, because they're the only company really committed to doing that. But the thing that we know so far is that we can only sort of rehash existing ideas, and this is going to be a problem. Already we're seeing it is like, because programmers are now thinking, wow, we can write more React code faster.
Yeah.
But nobody is thinking, well, how do we get rid of React and React,
Yeah.
write something entirely different, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And of course the AI is not going to be a help there, although you would be able to sort of like spar with it a little
That's
bit.
a really good point. I hadn't
Give
thought
it
of
some
that.
ideas. So, and the other thing that, that's relevant to say with all AI models at the moment, especially the generative image types, is that although it can sort of output 30 images of a dog, it's not going to know which one's good or which one's good for the situation that you want to bring that photo of a dog into.
Yeah.
So that human sort of curation is always going to be important.
Yeah.
But I do think that we're at the beginning of this, and if we think about where this is going to go, it's at the moment programmers are sort of quite happy about the idea of having Copilot running in Visual Studio and helping them. And some of them are starting to think, well, this does get rid of a lot of boilerplate code that I've normally written. But it doesn't take a genius to sort of take that to the next level and say, well, we don't need so many human abstractions around things like, divs and, all classes and all the rest of it. We can start thinking more about what is the final output that we want. And the final output in the case of Urbit code is knock.
Yeah.
And the final output in the case of something that appears in the web could be, for example, a VR, WebGL rendered screen or something like that. And so I think the next sort of big move here is going to be to think, well, all we need is a human interface and some computation.
Yeah.
And we need to work towards getting to that without all the human readable code in the middle.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think that, how much of and just talk about programming, not the other things that AI could be used for in this sophisticated autocomplete, which is probably, which is a fair, I think, presentation, is how much of that intermediate representation is because the programmer has to have a mental model of things, right?
Exactly.
And sort of like moving between them. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so it's interesting to think that is really unnecessary.
Exactly.
At a certain level.
Exactly, and that's like the big step that we need to take as quickly as possible, because so much of, if you think about the web, like you said earlier, and I totally agree, that computing today, especially on the web, is literally about manipulating a string. It's like you're going through so many processes to squirt a UTF-8 string out of a web server and to be rendered in the browser. It's absolute madness. But most of that is because humans have to rationalize over what a div is, what a class is, what an if-else statement is. But computers don't need to care about any of that. All they need to care about is zeros and ones. And by actually thinking about communicating with some sort of AI which is a conversational AI, and this is why I think ChatGPT really took off, because it's a two-way discussion with memory. Once you get that, and then you can see something and you can ask it and say, oh, can you make this bigger, or make it red, or can you do this when you click on it, or I want this to do what my friends is doing, but add this extra piece of functionality. It doesn't need to care about the frameworks underneath the hood. All it's caring about is your intention. And it's saying, okay, the intention here is to take this thing that works like this and make this thing red and make this thing bigger, and to show this error message when you click on it or something. So what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow in this talk is what I call intention-based programming. It's like recording intention, and from that intention, if you store that, you are then going to be able to iterate over multiple types of bytecode, which will eventually get more secure, more faster, more performant, more memory efficient, less buggy, hopefully 100% secure one day, so we can replace blockchain code and you won't need smart contract auditing. But that's the direction I think it's inevitably going to go.
That's interesting. Okay, so I have two questions. The first is, I drive a 1992 Ford F-150, which is a very simple car, very simple truck, but I like to drive older
vehicles because I like to open the hood
Yeah.
and see, and if something's wrong, it's like
Exactly.
apparent, right?
Exactly.
If you have a Tesla, you open the hood, it looks like an iPod. You have
for
no
sure.
idea what's going on. And I think about that in terms of like these intermediate representations within the system, right? And so I'm interested to know what you think in terms of that inspectability, because we ought to think about this in the kind of pathological case. It's not doing what you want.
100%.
So what do you think? How would that look?
100%. So the inevitable future will be that Microsoft first and then Google release some sort of create your own app tool either this year or next year. And of course, when you're dealing with some sort of big corporation, we know that one of the intentions there will be to, obviously drive, take analytics and drive behaviors and sell ads and things like that. At least we're going to be sort of, at least we know where they stand and what they're going to be doing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, there won't be any big surprises. The more worrying situation is when you tell the AI to do something and it ends up doing something totally different or something against your will. So the best defense, I think, with this is to take a similar approach that we do in crypto. So there some people in the past talked about having a phone with an integrated ledger. It's like, why don't we just make a phone and put a ledger in it?
Yeah.
And I always thought that was a pretty bad idea, because the whole point of having a hardware wallet and a laptop is that you have two pieces of machinery made in two separate factories with two separate interests.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what we'll end up with is like you will figure out like what company do I trust and what models do I trust.
Yeah.
And there will be some sort of thing that makes the code and something that checks the code to make sure that everything's good.
Adversarial.
But with different interests, like made by different companies,
Yeah.
Maybe different nationalities and so on. So I think we'll probably end up with something
That's
like that.
a really interesting idea. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's also, if you think about how that intermediate step is conveyed to the programmer user, it's like that could be, it's like right now it's like a stack trace, or it's like a very computery representation, right?
And there's something more to put in here as well. So I think the AI that we will be interacting with in terms of apps is going to sit on the top of a well-designed set of primitives. So if we think about the primitives that Urbit already gives us, which is identity and messaging and encryption by default, a file system, things like that. But the AI that we're going to talk with will actually hook into these, and probably some more around things like crypto wallets, things like Polymer building. But there's another one that we need to build in, which is that we need to monitor the data out of our system, because we only should ever care when it comes to privacy about what data leaves our devices.
Yeah.
It's the only thing we should care about. So it should be impossible for this AI on the top to start sending arbitrary data out to some arbitrary TCP IP address without us knowing, or at least having a pop-up at the operating system layer that says, hey, do you really want this data to leave your device? So it needs to be boxed in, and it needs to be constrained in a system that really respects your privacy by default.
Yeah. And that goes to your adversarial thing. It's like you want the dog leash to be made by the dog leash company and the dog.
Yes, you sort of want to set the AI free to work on these primitives to make good experiences over them, like the good interfaces and experiences that let you do simple things like booking taxis and all the things we normally do on our phones, for example. But you also want to box it in and constrain it heavily so it can't get out of this sandbox and start leaking all your data, which is really the primary, I would say the primary sort of more adversarial thing that a bad device or bad AI could do.
It's not going to seduce you and get
you. You could say that's also worrying too, but
that's a little farther out.
Exactly.
Cross that bridge when we come to it.
Indeed.
So my first question was the intermediate data thing, and the second was intention-based computing.
Yes.
Intention is like very potentially very complex psychological term, right?
Absolutely.
And so I'm interested to think, because I think you correctly said, okay, imagine we have really good autocomplete, and it gets more and more sophisticated in two ways. It can predict farther in advance, longer strings, right? So it's not just the next word or it's not T9 where it's like a word, it's a sentence, it's a function, it's a class. And also it does that by searching back based on more and more of the context of what's been written.
Yes.
Right. So it's not just that word, it's going back and looking at the entire context. Okay. So, and that's that makes sense for like words, as tokens. And so the question is like, how would intention, which actually we think about basically a psychological state of the user, how would that be encoded such that the system could look at it? You don't have to design it on the fly. I'm just kind of
well,
answering what your thoughts are.
I think I'm sort of very good at sort of seeing where we need to go. Like, I think honestly, I think this is 100% inevitable. Like, it may be one of those things that's 5 or 10 years away, but 100% we're going to get there.
How you get there is...
How are we going to get there? Well, the first clue is in the notion of verbs, right? Okay. So one of the things I think about on my phone, for example, is I organize all my apps by a verb. So like listen, eat, travel, something like that. Okay. So the intention is to travel somewhere. Then the question is, well, where are you traveling and how do you want to go there, right? So I think it will be some sort of way of doing that. It's like, I want to send this money, and then the questions will be, where are you sending it? How are you sending it? When does it need to get there? And so on. So that's what I mean by intention. On top of that is context. Okay. So you want to do something, but it may not be the time to do it, and you may be not in the right location to do it. So maybe when you do move to another location, like a restaurant, the screen is going to adapt and say, okay, it's more likely at this point you're going to want to eat something, and here's a menu, and here's the way of ordering. I don't think we've even begun to scratch the surface of what our phones could look like if they were really context aware, location aware, and also aware of your mood that you're in, and what's going on in your day. But in terms of coming back to applications, which my whole thing is like allowing normal, regular non-coders to make applications, then recording intention, if we can find a way to do it by someone much smarter than I, then we have this ability to constantly riff on the underlying code that gets us there. Something that will improve, get faster, more secure over time. And ultimately, I think we'll arrive at this point where we say this is what we have to capture and store. The rest is not as important.
That's a really interesting thing, just thinking about, right now, the inputs to this learning system are predominantly, text tokens, the verb, whatever. But what happens when your GPS, when your recent actions on your phone, right? It's like, it's funny, I was thinking about this the other day because iOS does this, and it's actually very interesting. It's like if you connect your headphones, it'll say often when you connect Bluetooth or your headphones, you do this. And I'm like, that's kind of to your point. That's kind of like you think of intention as this kind of sequence of actions in a context. Well, it's like that actually starts to look more doable, I think. That's a really interesting point. So I think it's like I'm assuming that, it sounds cliche, we've talked about this before, but this is like basically the movie Her is kind of, it was a good idea.
It's inevitable.
I
think we both feel about that, feel the same about that, but it really is, and we're already starting to see it with Replica and things like that, these little bots that people talk to.
So why don't you actually recap what about the movie is applicable here, because people, I've made this reference before and people are not 100% on that.
Okay, so the movie Her is all about having a personal AI, and it's your buddy, it's your friend, it's also your romantic partner. It really gets deep into reading all your emails. It knows what you're doing this day, and what relationships you have with various people, who you should be notified called you or messaged you, and who probably you don't want to reply to. It becomes your sort of work superhero. It fills out, it does your job faster. It feels inevitable that we will head towards that very rapidly. I think it's going to surprise people. Just think about if Google did this over people's Gmail data, how much knowledge it would have over you, and what meetings you're going to have today, and things like that. So the question always comes down to like, well, who owns that data, who controls it, and who's benefiting, right? And this is why, like, ultimately, when you look around the world at the moment, there's just nothing like Urbit, right? Because like, where else would you store an AI like this, and where else would you trust to have access to all your data? And so that's what the movie Her's about. And then Replica, for one, is understand. I never used it, but they were using a OpenAI ChatGPT API. But the terms and conditions suddenly changed overnight, and a lot of the more sort of sexual conversations which previously were allowed are no longer allowed. So people who are having these sort of AI girlfriends and boyfriends, and wrote on Reddit that they really got over the lockdown period. You know, they were telling things to these bots that they never told to their therapist. It was quite incredible. Found that they suddenly didn't have these like virtual friends
because the
anymore.
API changed, right?
Because of the terms and
terms of service, even worse.
Even worse. You know, so access to these models and access to the compute to do it it's soon going to be a human right, actually.
Absolutely,
And the reason it will obviously be a human right is because anyone who isn't using these tools will have no way of competing with those who do. It just is impossible. So,
that's a really interesting point, because, you know, I think a lot of times when people, I mean, we try to explain someone the benefits of Urbit, et cetera, and so forth. Data ownership is a thing that we, of course, like you pointed out, kind of like a sine qua non of the thing. But usually people think about that in like a purely, I don't know what the term would be, almost like aesthetic or ethical thing. Like, you know, it's like, I don't want Google looking through my dirty laundry. It's like, but why? You know, really, it's because it's gross, it's this, it's that, right? But what's interesting in the case of a private learning, you know, a personal assistant, this kind of stuff, is the inability to trust this thing fully will actually inhibit it being as good as it could be.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like an actual utility thing.
Exactly. So there was a great, wonderful product made last year called Serendipity. And it was the idea that, you know, you could imagine how amazing life would be if you knew where you were and what city and what connections you had there and what all the friends of friends and, you know, connecting over interests and so on. And I really loved the product. I loved the developer. You know, I really supported it. But when it came to me putting my private data in and everything about my life, I was like, oh, hang on a minute, right? And eventually, like stuff like that, where you really are trusting it with everything, you've really got to be sure where you're putting it. And it's so for me, and as things get more personal with the new wave of personal computing, like deeply personal, it has to live on your ideally own hardware and own box. You know, something like Native Planet, for example. It's the only way I'd even think about trusting.
I mean, 100%. And it's such an interesting thing because it's sort of like you have to trust. You have to basically make this is going to sound manipulative, but it's not. It's like, truly have the user know and believe that it's their data. Does that make sense? Where it's like, it's hard to convince people that, because how do you prove it, right? To an average user.
We have a reverse problem now, which is that there was an article by BBC News recently saying that people are taking their Alexa devices and putting them in the drawers. They're not using them anymore. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I read into it, and apparently one of the reasons, well, two reasons, right? One is that Alexa kept annoying them with things like, how was that? You know, hey, you've just bought a mop from Amazon. Do you rate it 3 stars, 5 stars, whatever? How was it? You know, and which of course would be annoying, very Amazon. And then the second thing was they were starting to think, well, hang on a minute, we're putting so much data into this, where it's going. And they would have read something on news about that. Now, the issue with that, of course, is there's nothing actually inherently wrong with talking to your computer. Nothing wrong with it at all.
You heard it here first.
We're going to have to do a reverse education thing where we can say, look, your personal voice assistant is now running on Urbit on your device in your home, and it's never leaking any data by design. Like, you know, we put so many safeguards in at every different level that you can trust this thing. And I think it is possible to do that. There needs to be a real commitment from higher up. You know, to be like, nothing is going out of this box until we say it goes out. But it is possible to do that, and containing this AI, containing this very powerful, you know, black hole of a data sucking machine is going to be imperative.
I mean, that's a really interesting point, because, you know, and I come across this a lot when discussing like designing things for Urbit. It's that in the physical world, if I want to lock my car, I have all these cues where it's locked. I can see all the doors are shut. You know what I mean? I can convince myself that it is locked. You know what I mean? But in a digital or virtual environment, you don't have that same visceral sense out of the box, right? It's like you start up a computer, I'm like, I have no idea what's zooming in and zooming out of this. So it's like an interesting problem, actually.
I've thought about this a lot, and the the sad truth is that you can never be sure. The sad truth is, and it, we heard today about Austin saying that there's a company that makes laptops for Edward Snowden.
Yeah.
And they take a photo of the laptop, they seal it in a special bag.
Yeah.
They've done everything they possibly can to buy the chips from the right. But how do you actually know that chip hasn't got something on it that's not going to leak the data? You just simply can't know. So there is a level of, you're just going to have to make peace with it. And I remember in Bogota, most of the people at DEF CON, some of their, like the old crypto anarchists, they want to disrupt the system. And then you find some on the real sort of like extremes of the spectrum that don't want to be photographed, don't want anyone to get their phone out near them. Will actively do this when you, and you at some point you will have to draw a line as how paranoid am I going to be. But I think the key with Urbit is that it has to demonstrate from the beginning and all the way through. Like if you slice it in the middle, you will see that there was, no matter where you look at it from any angle, there is an effort and a degree of integrity and a constant desire from everyone involved to keep your data secret and private. And that's enforced at every level, most importantly, the network level.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think absent that kind of physical, tangible, which we evolve in the physical world, right?
Yeah.
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Absent that, faith in the, in the principle, that actually kind of can stand in for it, So it's like if we, as a community, you meet us, blah, blah, and we're we're not trying to do something, we are committed to this.
Exactly.
Like that can probably do a lot of work.
Exactly, and you demonstrate your values in every action you take. And if everything we do, as it has done, as it has been, it continues down this line of, you own your own data. When we all move to AIs, and we will, you run it on top of your Urbit chip, which has access to all your data, not just one particular app like Google's or Microsoft's will. And we can verifiably prove that no data can arbitrarily leak this out of the system without your express approval. I think that's important. It's not something that Urbit does today, but I really want it to do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we kind of, you mentioned this, but I think it's an interesting point to bring up. It's that this term that, you've heard of HyperCard, for example, or there has been efforts in the past to and Excel is actually the best example. I'm an Excel apologist, because in terms of exposing the power of a computer to the average person, Excel has done more than anybody, right? And so the fact that you have a program that can be a shopping list or a complicated financial model for a small country, and you don't have to decide which one it is when you open up Excel. That should be given some credit, But this idea of extending kind of or blurring the line, let's say, between a developer and a user in terms of their ability to sort of configure their computer. So I wonder if you have an idea kind of what that flow would be. You know what I mean? Keep asking you to design things on the fly, but it's in your kind of fantasy world.
Are we talking about the interface to the computer now? How would it look?
Well, I think about it a lot of what we're discussing is kind of an interface thing, right? And so it's I think that what you said before is actually very important to bring up, if I understood it correctly, which is there's going to be some parts of the system that were designed from first principles the old-fashioned way, right? But then there's a layer above that, we might even call it user space, is kind of grown in this interactive way, right? And that's a really important thing to bring up, right? It's there is some level of you can provably say the networking works like this. You don't want someone talking to their Alexa and rewriting the network protocol. So I think I'd be interested to know, either from the, not visual interface, but just the interface kind of broadly speaking.
So the way I think computing will go now is that we will continue to have software engineers designing these primitives. And because software engineering is so much more than just coding, it's thinking about trade-offs continually. Should I do this and take more bytes than this thing, or do this and make it more safe and secure that the message gets there, and continually think about security and how does this API work with this one, and we will still have the internal APIs that sit on human understandable abstractions. But on top of that, we will find some way of teaching, the AI models about what's available to it, and then say, go and play with these primitives and make different permutations on top.
Interesting. Okay.
The way that application looks to the user will then become personalized to them. So as we heard with Liam's excellent talk about native UI, 100% agree with all of that. We need to get back to a world where your computer looks like you want it to look like.
Yeah.
And we can both be booking taxis and hiring bikes and ordering food in completely different interfaces.
Yeah.
But the interfaces that we want with the sort of level of detail and the colors and the large fonts, whatever we like.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big part. There will be more customizability in the future once we break out of the app model, and the app model is like this one square, one screen model, which has constrained us for so long. When we start getting real composability of not just data but services like blockchain services, decentralized services, pulling that in, we will start to be able to make new interfaces where we're combining multiple things in one.
Yeah.
And this is actually how I really think Urbit wins, right?
Yeah.
We don't win by like saying we're private and secure. Very few people care.
Exactly.
But
that number's not growing.
It's not going to go. But we give them an experience that blows them away with something that they simply can't do on an iPhone. Something that Google and Microsoft could never match because it would break their entire business system to do so.
Yeah.
That's, I think, how we get there.
That's wow. Because I think I just spoke with Liam, and we were talking about, having custom renderers per,
100%
ship,
agree.
right? And, I was thinking this kind of small level, like, almost at the level of CSS, but like kind of simpler, right? It's like, so I want my headers to be in Comic Sans and blue on a green background or whatever. But I was still thinking about interfacing it with it in this kind of, I get declarative and imperative mixed up, whatever. How you should do it, right?
Yes, yes.
I'm telling the interface, I'm like, make those things blue, right? And kind of what you're saying is, no, I could actually have, and we could probably do this soon, actually.
Very soon.
The ability to guide an AI through layouts of renderers, right? So I could be like, generate 4 potential layouts for my chat app, and I'll say, okay, I'll take one, but make it bigger. This is kind of what you're alluding
exactly.
to.
So what we're going to move to eventually is really intelligent rendering engines that are, first of all, how frustrating is it when we go to a sign-up form and it asks you yet again for your zip code? It's like you just, you dumb computer. But so a lot of UI will never appear in the first place once the actual system understands the data.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to ultimately end up with less UI. That's a good thing. Like when you book a cab, it'll know where you are, and you won't need to fill any of this in. So that's going to be one thing, and then the second thing is the screen will adapt to what's going on with your life at the moment. So, like I say, the context, and it will give you the various options and the verbs that you can do there. That's the other part. But the other thing is that we're still not going to move away entirely from the idea of a designed experience.
Yeah.
But the point is that all of us can be designers.
Yeah.
So I could be looking at your screen right now, and you've been to this event, you've made some like really cool modifications to the interface to manage people and talk with them and things like that. And maybe you came across somebody else who's written like a little application, either generated entirely by AI or with some primitives underneath which were coded. And what I'm really a big favor of is this idea of forking the UI.
Yeah.
So I look at your screen, I'm like, I could do a bit of that on my phone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll have a way of just, whether it's a QR code or something else, I can just zap that thing, put it on my screen, and then start making my own customizations. It's like, okay, I like this, but I'll make this thing purple or whatever.
Yeah.
So we all become designers. And I think this is the way it will work. Now, of course, if you take that to the next level, you're going to have celebrity interfaces, where people are going to buy them
exactly.
from, like, because I want my phone to look like, some celebrity. Right?
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
I want a Harry Styles phone.
Yeah. So, and it will be a thing. It's like they already sell the Instagram filters. Why wouldn't they sell this, right? So, that's feels 100% inevitable. It's going to happen. And So this is why, like, all this sugar on top, and it is important, it will drive, people into the ecosystem. It has to also be backed by a firm commitment to, data privacy and safety at the bottom. And it's like, I think us in this sort of community are the stewards of, trying to do it right, basically. And but at the same time, if we don't make the sugar, then nobody's going to come and do it right. So it's a little bit of both as well. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that this. And it's so interesting how this dovetails exactly with Liam's work, because
Liam is so right. Like I was sitting there like nodding all the way. And also, he's the only guy to ever talk about this. All these years I've been to web development conferences and Ethereum conferences, and everyone's just plodding out JavaScript, React, Svelte interfaces. And I'm there like, surely there's a better way.
Yeah, there has to be a better way.
And he's 100% agree. And at the end of his talk, I said to him, like, don't dilute it. Don't let someone come and say, no, we must put JavaScript to React in it. No. Like, do it properly. Like, no matter how long it takes, because we need to get back to the idea that anyone can make an interface over the primitives that the operating system exposes. And you will soon be able to say, like, I want to send this money. It's calling the wallet primitive. I want to chat to this person. It's called the messaging one. But the AI will be able to construct on the fly liquid experiences. I'm not going to call them apps because an app has too many preloaded connotations. But I'm going to call them like liquid experiences that flow and change, and they look delicious, and they will be in the style that you want it to look in. And you want a piece of art on your phone that someone's like, wow, that looks amazing. How can I get a bit of that? Right?
So. That's a really compelling vision. I think the fact that we can sort of because what we've talked about the contrary to all this that everyone always says is that Urbit is slow. It's like, how are you going to do any of this kind of like AI stuff on the Urbit, which I think I personally have no doubt that we'll figure it out.
I have no doubt we'll figure it out. And I mean, for two reasons. One is that everyone is now like going AI crazy and thinking about the chips, and actually like the iPhone's like really well set up for this. I know we can't build on that, but it will come. But more importantly, like you need a big moon mission to bring new capital, new developers, new skills and talents.
And a vision to necessitate
this, exactly.
Right?
And that vision cannot be own your own data. We've tried it millions of years ago. Millions of years ago. But we've tried it for years and years, and with like own your own keys, own your own Bitcoin. And so, it will always be a niche minority that gets it. But everyone, if you tell them you can make your own apps, and it's safe and secure, and we can prove it, and you're not sending all your data. In fact, if you are sending your data to a company, you're going to get paid for it. Whoa, So that's the sort of vision we need, I think. Something that really brings people in, that really affects them day to day. And the absolute moment you can get something on Urbit that you can't get on anywhere else, that's when it starts to really change.
I agree 100%, and that's a great place to stop. So, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your vision with me. And if anyone wants to read more about your thoughts, or where do you post?
Just a website. So that's owenbarnes.com.
Okay.
And then on Urbit, it's locruc-fonmec.
Outstanding.
Which is also on there. So
great. Okay. Well, and I'll put those in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you.
Amazing.